Our final option tonight is, or excuse me, final item tonight is new business. Any council member with new business? Councilman Kelly.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'd like to revisit a topic that we heard about in public forum earlier this evening, which is the IMEA sustainability plan that our city's representative has to vote on at IMEA's board meeting on Thursday. And I've got a couple of concerns about that plan, some of the things that we heard from our speakers. I've got a couple of substantive concerns myself, but my bigger concern than any specific substantive issue within that plan is more of a process question in terms of how we give or do not give our city's representative direction to take that vote at the board meeting. And I know our city's representative takes a number of votes all the time at meetings like that are generally procedural in nature. My concern is that this particular one is really more of a substantive and a strategic question, and my concern is that the council and the public haven't had an opportunity to truly vet that plan and the questions that may come along with it. You know, it's never been on an agenda, and it's only come up at public forum tonight with a couple of speakers, but my guess is that most of our residents probably don't even know that could be voted on Thursday. So my preference would be when we have a question like this, that it come to council for a discussion, conversation, public can give input, and then council as a body could give informed input to our representative to go take a vote one way or the other at a meeting in a board like IMEA. So I don't know what other council members might think about this, but my request would be to have our representative ideally table the consideration of the sustainability plan on Thursday, so that we could have an opportunity to come back and have a public discussion about it and give informed opinions to our representative. In the event that it couldn't be tabled, my personal preference again would be for our representative to abstain from a vote, because I just don't think myself, and I don't know about the rest of the council members, but for myself, I'm not sure if I'm in a position at this point to really give direction that I think you should either approve or deny the plan, because we just haven't had all that information in public discourse. So I don't know if there will be further conversation, Mayor, but my question ultimately would be to have a show of hands to see if our representative could either table or abstain from a vote if necessary on Thursday night.
There's some lights on, so let's see what they have to say first. Councilwoman Longbaugh.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilman Kelly. I do agree with that. We were able to see the sustainability plan as one of the memos that we had received, and overall it seems like there are some nice things in it, but it does seem rather superficial, and so I would like some more time to get some input on it and to actually learn a little bit more about it. I mean, we heard from Greg tonight, and there are definitely experts in Nest who I'm sure would like to sink their teeth into it a little bit as well, and to review it. And I don't think it's necessarily something that the city should be endorsing just yet. I mean, one of the things that I saw in there was new and emerging technologies, and it mentioned carbon capture. And I know I don't really want to be a part of any investment in carbon capture, and so I'm worried that it could be a slippery slope with that. So would also kind of prefer to have a little bit more time and see if you could abstain or table it. I would prefer that as well. So thank you.
Councilman Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciated hearing from Greg and Carl tonight. They've worked with Brian and spoken here many times. And they've talked about what a great relationship that they have with Director Groth. And we've seen the plan as it is right now. It does have some renewable plan in there. I know that Director Groth has worked with this as part of the contract negotiations to be put in place going forward. And I'm not, we have directors of different things, and to me it just seems like stepping on their toes, I guess you could say, as getting involved in what they're doing to say, hey, you have to come back to us to review whatever it is. For example, we just went through a large water contract as well, and that didn't seem to have to be done either. So I would not support this. In fact, I'd be concerned with telling the rest of the other members of IMEA if we didn't support, if we're not going to be part of this, then what they would do if it still existed as is. So that's my position.
Councilman White.
Yeah, Mayor, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Councilman Kelly for the exact same reasons that he just mentioned as well. So I would like for us to get more information so that we can discuss it. But I think even above and beyond that, I think a conversation needs to take place amongst our leadership as far as we need to figure out exactly what do we want as a community, as a city, and what are our goals and where we want to, go from a renewable standpoint and all that, because we've all have campaigned and we've talked to Ness and all that, and it seems to me everyone understands that coal is bad. We want to move away from it. So I think we have that synergy amongst us, but now I think we need to kind of start giving some overall guidance so that all of our decisions that we're making at this point, for example, the discussion that we're talking about that needs to take place, if we have some goals established above that, that will help guide that particular conversation. And I'm not sure I don't think we've done that yet. We haven't, that way, once we do that, we can provide better direction for when you go down there and discuss and talk. But that conversation, I would just tell you, or discussion or workshop needs to take place, in my opinion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I agree, again, with Councilman Kelly in his suggestion here. The question I have is, do we have the power to do either? Does staff know the answer to that here tonight? Do we have the power to ask IMEA to table it? And if not, do we have the power to abstain our vote? So I don't know if staff can answer that.
Director Groth, you want to try?
Brian Groth, Electric Utility Director. Yes, I could go down to IMEA and abstain from voting. I could also vote against the plan. I will remind everyone that, I was part of the working group that created this document. It does set some meaningful goals for the agency, and it lays out the conceptual plan to move away from coal, by 2050. There is a stakeholder process in this whereby every 3 years, the IMEA will come back to council, and we'll talk with council about what those goals were, how those goals will be reshaped in the future. Every year, IMEA will report to the board of directors their progress on those goals. Nothing in the document says things can't move faster, but as from an agency perspective, this is what IMEA staff feels is reasonable and attainable from moving forward. So those are the options: yes, no, and abstain.
Councilman McBroom.
Yeah, I'm not going to encourage Director Groth to do one thing or the other. I'm going to trust his judgment. He's an expert on this topic. He knows more than I do or any of us on this dais. So he does his homework, and that's where I would stand on that.
Okay, seeing no more, Councilman Holzar.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a question for Mr. DeSanto. I actually kind of am curious about the reverse of Councilman Kelly's question. For the record, I'm actually kind of undecided on this. I don't view this as a policy choice really about what Naperville is going to, how we're going to source our energy, which is really the question we see coming in the years down the road. But my question for Mr. DeSanto is, Councilman Kelly's asking for kind of a poll for us providing a direction, but there hasn't been a direction provided yet. I mean, isn't it really there's no direction right now? I mean, does Mr. Groth actually have a direction right now at all, whether to vote yes, no, or otherwise?
Counselor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think the director has apparent authority to go and make the decisions consistent with his role and responsibilities. To Councilman Kelly's point, this isn't on the agenda, so council can't make a motion and take a vote since this isn't something on the agenda. Council can provide input in a public setting to the director that he can take into account. You can direct with encouragement to bring this back for council consideration at a future meeting, but the council can't vote to give direction at this meeting since it's not on the agenda. And so I think council needs to be careful about how far they're going here. They can provide the input. The city manager and the director can hear that input and then make a decision based on that, but there can't actually be a motion and a vote since this wasn't published on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Mr. DeSanto.
All right, Councilman Kelly, do you want to restate your ask for hands to clarify what we're going to be raising our hands for?
I certainly could do that. I guess what I probably need to know from Attorney DeSanto is if assuming that it's conceptually consistent with what I mentioned earlier, is that a permissible question to ask?
I mean, really, new business is intended for council to give direction to staff to bring something back at a future meeting. And so I think you can express your concern. You can ask, direct staff to, provide council with a report of options and perhaps get some direction from the city manager and the council communicate with the city manager. It's difficult to take a vote up here for something that's not on the agenda. It hasn't had the opportunity for public input to be put on, knowing that this was something that council was going to consider this evening.
So I think what I'll probably do is change my request a little bit from what I mentioned earlier and ask two things. One would be for our electric department director and for our city manager to consider the input that they've heard tonight prior to casting his vote on Thursday. And then secondly, I would ask that at some future date, if we can have, even if it's offline conversations between council members and staff, to discuss how this particular relationship works and at what point in times and what questions the electric department should come to council to put something on the agenda for formal input when it's a strategic or substantive question that should potentially require a formal vote from council before a vote is cast with IMEA.
I'm in agreement with you, Councilman. I think to have clarification on those strategic votes that a appointed director to any outside board might be taking versus a procedural vote is important. It also helps insulate that director if they're making those types of votes with the full support of at least a majority of the council in those cases. So I think that's a good recommendation. Mr. Krieger.
Thank you, Mayor. And just so you know my interpretation of that, I've heard many different opinions on here. One of the things that's helpful with suggestion is, for this, IMEA has this plan and says, hey, you know what, we have this sustainability plan and we're going to be taking it to a vote. It's helpful if someone says, hey, you know what, if on page 4 you change this date to this, or and on page 7 you change this date to this, I would be supportive of it. My understanding of what we've received so far is that simply we don't like it, it's not fast enough. And that, to take that to the group, say on Thursday, if Brian were to say, well, there was a lot of talk, their natural response should be, okay, well, what specifically didn't they like, and could we consider some changes to those? Unfortunately, in this case, we don't really have that, which I think would make for a much more fruitful discussion down at IMEA, if that makes sense.
Councilwoman Taylor?
Thank you, Mayor. To be clear, I'm not up here saying that I don't like it, it's not fast enough. I'm up here saying that this is a document that is being used as the reason why we need to start looking at contract negotiations in the spring. That's what IMEA is claiming, and that they're kind of fast forwarding when we would normally be looking at these contract negotiations, because they're saying they need to know if they have the support for the sustainability plan. So they're relying on this document. They're making this document out to be an extremely important document. And so when I come here before, where I don't feel like I'm educated enough on this document and the pros and the cons. I know Nest came before us, but I mean, I'm even the Nest liaison. I met with them last week, and they didn't even have yet all the information to present to me, so that I could come up with my own educated decision as to, is this something that, yeah, is it one part that's the problem? Is it the carbon capture? Is it the whole thing? What should I be advocating for either way? And so personally, I feel like this came up to us very quickly, which I wouldn't mind, except for the fact that it's being used as the reason why we're starting contract negotiations this spring, years ahead of schedule. So I guess that's why as much as and I do trust Brian and all the work that he's done. At the end of the day, though, but actually I take that back. Brian gets yelled at too. But so do we. So I want to make sure that I'm fully educated as to what I am supporting and not supporting. And so that's why when Councilman Kelly came to me today and asked, would I be okay with suggesting an abstain of vote or even tabling it if we could, I said yes.
Mr. Krieger?
No, and I appreciate that clarification. We are all on the same team here. One of the things, with respect to any plan that is going to run 30 years, it is not set in stone. So if the plan were to pass and we had some logical changes or suggestions, my understanding would be that Brian would say, hey, you know what? I would suggest we change these two components or modify these components of the plan. It is a plan. It is not something that is going to be unchanged between now and 2050. It just kind of really is a start to lay something out. My guess is that there would be changes with respect to new opportunities or potential delays with it. So it would continue to be a living document that could incorporate kind of specific changes if we identified them down the road.
Councilman Kelly?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to answer City Manager Krieger's question about specifics, for one, I agree 100% with Councilwoman Taylor that it is not certainly solely for me that it's not enough, not fast enough. I may believe that is also true personally, but that's not the sole basis by any stretch. One thing I agree with Councilwoman Longabaugh on is the carbon capture. For me, that is something that I just philosophically don't believe should be part of a sustainability plan. The possibility of looking at a multi-billion-dollar carbon capture plant to keep a coal plant running. But I think it's just totally preliminary to ask the council to take a vote on any specific issue, or certainly something as enormous as a carbon capture plan. We've had no discussion on it, so I don't think we can, as a body, realistically give you specific direction on that specific point. So it is really the general portion of it that we haven't been fully briefed. We haven't vetted it with the public, and that would be my personal direction to Mr. Groth as in terms of whatever kind of feedback he's going to give a council. And again, I think probably from what I've heard, at least tonight, there's probably not going to be cohesive, specific direction to take a specific vote, but I would ask that you consider the input that you've heard and act accordingly on Thursday.
Councilman Wilson?
Just to kind of echo City Manager Krieger's comments, some of the complaints that I had heard was, well, we don't like it, or it's not good enough, or what have you. But I also haven't heard alternatives and what that would change, percentage of changes, what that would be reflected in whatever rates we're talking about. This was also sent to us, the document too, so we're fully able to read it. But just give my opinion here as we're able to read it. Director Groth, maybe, if not today, would you be able to talk about or follow up with a memo or something about why the contract may be presented next year.
Mr. Groth?
Thank you, Mayor. So IMEA is looking at a contract extension beginning next year. The timeline has not been finalized by IMEA. They are running into a runway issue where, the agency does not exist past 2035. So a decision will be needed from member communities so they can plan their long-term resources for 2035 and beyond. As we know, Prairie State is slated to reduce to 45% no later than 2038 and completely retire by, I believe it is 2045. So there are some long-term planning decisions that IMEA needs to make, and they need to know, quite honestly, who is on board for the long term so that they can make those long-term decisions.
Thank you.
Councilman Holzhauer?
Thank you, Mayor. So Councilman Kelly can vouch for this, but when he proposed this idea to me, my request was actually that we not take a hand raise on this, and I was planning to either abstain or probably vote no. And my reason for that is I was seeing this as document, as I mentioned earlier, as maybe a little more symbolic in nature, just kind of a general guideline. But I think to the mayor's point, this dialogue is actually a great example of how there's all kinds of factors that are now being discussed that we haven't had a chance to look into. And let's just set aside the environmental stuff for a second. Councilwoman Taylor just brought up that this, document is being used as a primary justification to accelerate a contract negotiation. That's a multi-billion-dollar commitment. And if that's changing our bargaining position at all, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but that's a discussion we should probably have public forum on. We should probably be getting briefed on. We should be really, really thinking about how to approach that negotiation carefully. So I guess that Councilwoman Taylor's comment convinced me. I don't even know if we're going to do the hand raise, but my feedback would be, to the extent this is in any way accelerating a negotiation where real dollars are at stake, I would want us to be discussing those financial things first. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Longenbaugh?
Thank you, Mayor. I think for me is that maybe I just don't understand what this document is, because it does seem kind of superficial. We talk about we've got 80% of our energy coming from coal, but it seems like in here that they're only directing 11% of it to go to sustainable sources like solar and wind and water. And so that was a little confusing if this is a sustainability document or proposal. It has nice items in it, like residential thermostats, and they give a nice plug for their really beautiful building down in Springfield, but none of that is really going to get us off coal. So I'm kind of wondering, if this is a sustainability document, then where are those big ticket items that are really going to get us off coal? Because that should be the ultimate goal. And so that's why I'm kind of confused about what this is, maybe. So that's why I'd kind of like some more information as well.
All right, Councilman Kelly, are you asking for any hands in the air at this point, or no?
I think we can probably rest where we are if the city manager and the electric department director are comfortable with what they've heard.
Mr. Krieger?
I'm comfortable with what I heard. It sounds like whichever direction I go, there will be some council members who will be supportive of that, and some council members who will not. And I am also comfortable with being in that position as well.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
Any other new business? Seeing nothing else, may I have a motion to adjourn?